The airport was buzzing with its usual chaos, families rushing, suitcases rolling, announcements echoing overhead. But in the middle of that everyday hustle, one scene stopped everyone cold. A group of officers closed in on a tall black man near the boarding gate, their hands already hovering over their weapons. Passengers stared, whispering, some reaching for their phones. The officers claimed he was a security threat, their eyes filled with suspicion. The man stood calm, his face unreadable, as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. What no one, neither the officers nor the shocked crowd, realized at that moment was simple, yet staggering. The man they just stopped wasn't a passenger. He was the pilot of the flight. Hours earlier, the man had arrived at the airport like he always did. Early, prepared and professional. His crisp uniform was neatly folded in his garment bag, his pilot's credentials secure in his briefcase. For him, flying wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Every flight carried lives, families, dreams, and he treated that responsibility with the utmost seriousness. But beneath that calm exterior was a man who had fought battles far beyond the cockpit. He knew that wearing a sharp suit or carrying an ID badge didn't always protect him. Time and time again, he had been judged not by his achievements, but by the color of his skin. Still, he had risen above. Countless hours of training, years of dedication and sacrifices had propelled him into one of the most respected positions in aviation. Yet, despite his wings, despite the authority and knowledge he carried, prejudice had a way of finding him in the most humiliating places. As he made his way through security, everything seemed normal at first. He kept his head high, knowing eyes often lingered on him longer than others. He was used to whispers. Is he really a pilot? Or, what's he doing in that line? Still, he brushed it off, focused only on the flight he was about to command. But today would be different. Today, suspicion would outweigh common sense. Today, authority would be abused in front of hundreds of travelers. And today, the world would see just how fragile respect can be when racism clouds judgment. The moment he stepped closer to the boarding gate, the energy shift was palpable. Two uniformed officers, who had been lingering near the terminal doors, locked eyes with him. Their stares carried a weight that was all too familiar, scrutiny laced with suspicion. At first he tried to dismiss it. He'd faced this silent judgment countless times before, in grocery stores, at hotels, even during routine traffic stops. But airports? They carried a different kind of danger. Authority here was amplified, unquestioned, and rarely challenged. As he rolled his small suitcase toward the gate, the officers moved quickly, blocking his path. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions," one barked, loud enough for surrounding passengers to turn their heads. He froze for a moment, steadying his breath, keeping his tone composed. Years in the cockpit had taught him the importance of calm under pressure. Still, he could feel dozens of eyes burning into his back, silently asking, what did he do? The officers demanded identification, rifling through his belongings as if searching for a hidden crime. His credentials, government-issued, laminated, and perfectly valid, were dismissed with a smirk. "This doesn't prove anything," one muttered, waving the badge as if it were fake. Passengers began to whisper, cell phones discreetly lifted to record the scene. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others leaned forward with that unsettling curiosity people show when they're witnessing a public humiliation. The black man kept his voice measured. He explained where he was going, what his role was, and even mentioned the flight number. None of it mattered. The officers had already decided who he was before he opened his mouth. To them, he wasn't a professional entrusted with hundreds of lives. He was a suspect, a threat, a man who didn't belong. When the handcuffs clicked, the air in the terminal shifted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Children stared wide-eyed. Parents pulled them close, and some travelers openly questioned the officer's actions. "Why are you arresting him?" a voice shouted, but it was drowned out by official commands. The man stood still, refusing to resist, his dignity intact even as the cold steel bit into his wrists. The officers began marching him toward the side of the gate area. With every step, disbelief grew among the onlookers. He could see the very plane. He was scheduled to fly through the wide glass windows, its nose angled toward the runway. That aircraft, and the passengers waiting to board it, were his responsibility. Yet here he was, paraded through the airport as though he were a criminal. Inside, frustration boiled, but he knew better than to let it show. The more composed he remained, the more their actions would reveal themselves for what they were. Baseless, fueled by prejudice, and humiliatingly wrong. What the officers didn't know was that their reckless judgment was seconds away from collapsing in front of everyone. The scene had reached its breaking point. The man, bound in handcuffs, stood surrounded by officers as murmurs swept the terminal like wildfire. Dozens of phones were now recording, their red dots blinking, capturing every humiliating second. The officers puffed out their chests, convinced. They had neutralized some kind of threat. Then a sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos. From the jet bridge, a flight attendant rushed forward, her eyes widening in horror. "What are you doing? That's our pilot!" she shouted, her voice cracking with disbelief. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Passengers gasped. Others froze mid-step, their whispers growing louder, sharper, and filled with outrage. The officers hesitated, their bravado faltering for the first time. "Excuse me?" one stammered. But before he could regain his footing, another airline staff member appeared, this time the co-pilot, his expression a mix of anger and urgency. He held up his own credentials, pointing directly at the man in cuffs. "You just arrested the captain of this flight. Without him, nobody here is going anywhere." The crowd erupted. Shock turned into anger, murmurs into shouts. People raised, their voices questioning, demanding answers. "He's the pilot? Are you serious right now?" Unbelievable. The officers, once so confident, now shifted uncomfortably under the weight of hundreds of condemning eyes and dozens of recording phones. The man remained silent, his calm more powerful than any argument. His very presence, disciplined, dignified, unshaken, contradicted every lie the officers had projected onto him. He wasn't a threat. He was a leader, a professional, a man responsible for guiding lives safely through the skies. The realization crashed down on everyone present. Racism had just grounded an entire flight. The officers had not only humiliated an innocent man, but also jeopardized the trust and safety of every passenger waiting to board. The terminal, once filled with whispers, now buzzed with fury. In that moment, the entire crowd knew they had witnessed something bigger than a wrongful arrest. They had seen racism strip away dignity until truth forced it to crumble. The officers fumbled, scrambling to undo the handcuffs as the airline staff closed in, their voices sharp with outrage. The clinking of metal as the cuffs released was louder than the bustling terminal itself. But the damage had already been done. The pilot flexed his wrists, not out of weakness, but to remind himself of his strength. Strength that no prejudice could erase. Passengers applauded, some out of relief, others out of sheer defiance against what they had just witnessed. The officers avoided eye contact, suddenly aware of the dozens of cameras still trained on them. They had meant to assert authority, but instead, they had exposed their bias for the world to see. In trying to humiliate one man, they had humiliated themselves. The pilot didn't shout. He didn't lash out. With quiet dignity, he gathered his belongings, walked past the officers, and continued toward the jet bridge. The sight of him, calm and steady, boarding the very plane he was about to command, sent chills through the crowd. He wasn't just reclaiming his place, he was reclaiming the narrative they had tried to strip from him. Minutes later, as passengers boarded the aircraft, many looked at him differently now, not just as their pilot, but as a symbol of perseverance in the face of hate. A reminder that competence, professionalism, and humanity can never be defined by skin color. For the officers, the consequences would echo beyond that terminal. Investigations would follow, careers would be questioned, and reputations, once taken for granted, would be forever stained. But for the passengers, and for everyone who would later watch the viral videos online, the takeaway was undeniable. Racism doesn't just wound individuals. It endangers trust, safety, and dignity for all. As the plane lifted into the sky, guided by the very man who had been unjustly shackled, the unspoken truth settled into every mind that witnessed it. Prejudice may try to ground you, but truth has a way of soaring higher. So ask yourself this. If a man trusted to carry hundreds of lives safely through the skies can still be reduced to a suspect simply because of his skin, what does that say about the world we live in? And more importantly, if this can happen to him, imagine how many others face the same injustice without cameras, without crowds, without a voice. Would you have spoken up if you were there? Or would you have stayed silent? Comment your thoughts below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, share this video and subscribe for more. Together, maybe we can start grounding racism before it takes flight again.